What is the single biggest unforeseen consequence of ubiquitous social media we'll face in 20 years?
20 years from now, the single biggest unforeseen consequence of ubiquitous social media won't be a political or technological shift, but a biological and psychological one: the atrophy of the private self. While we early adopters viewed social media as a tool for connection, the generation coming of age in 2045 will have experienced it as an externalized nervous system. When every thought, memory, and emotion is immediately digitized, validated by an algorithm, or curated for an audience, the boundary between the internal mind and the external feed begins to dissolve. Here is how this consequence will manifest in 2 decades. 1. The death of the internal monologue. Research into neuroplasticity suggests that the brain prunes functions it no longer uses. In 20 years, we may face a crisis of cognitive outsourcing. The problem: if an algorithm predicts your needs, curates your aesthetic, and provides a correct reaction to every event, the internal muscle of introspection, the ability to sit with oneself and form an independent opinion, atrophies. The result: a generation that struggles with epistemic sovereignty, or the ability to know what they believe without checking the digital pulse of their network first. 2. The dead internet and the end of shared reality. By 2045, the dead internet theory, the idea that most online content is AI-generated and bot-driven, will likely be a lived reality. The unforeseen twist: the consequence isn't just fake news. It's the collapse of the evidentiary function of life. When every video, audio clip, and historical record can be perfectly synthesized, truth ceases to be something that can be proven. This leads to hyper-localism. People may stop trusting global digital information entirely and retreat into tiny, physical-only trust circles, effectively reversing the globalizing promise of the early internet. 3. The legacy gap. We are currently the first generation to document every second of our lives, yet we are likely to be the most forgotten in history. The paradox: because social media platforms are proprietary and digital formats are fragile, the datafied self is incredibly ephemeral. In 20 years, when today's platforms are defunct or their servers wiped, billions of people may find they have no secondary memory, physical photos, letters, or journals to look back on. We face a future where our personal histories are held hostage by the business models of dead companies. Would you like me to dive deeper into how this shift might affect specific areas, like the legal system's ability to use evidence or the potential for a digital minimalism counterculture?
Yes, please, dive deeper into how this shift might affect specific areas you mentioned.
This shift toward an externalized nervous system by 2045 creates a ripple effect that will fundamentally restructure our most foundational institutions. Here is a deeper look at how the legal system and our social hierarchies will adapt to the death of the private self. 1. The legal system. From seeing is believing to math is believing. In 20 years, the traditional concept of eyewitness or video evidence will be functionally obsolete due to the perfect synthesis of an eye. To survive, the legal system will likely pivot to cryptographic provenance. The biological alibi. As deepfakes become indistinguishable from reality, individuals may begin wearing LifeLoggers, secure, blockchainian script wearables that record every second of their lives. In a 2045 courtroom, you won't prove your innocence with a video. You will prove it by providing a cryptographic key that matches the metadata of your location and biometrics at the time of a crime. The liar's dividend. This is a legal phenomenon where the possibility of deepfakes allows guilty parties to claim that real, incriminating evidence is actually fake. We will see a shift where the burden of proof moves from the accuser to the evidence itself. If a piece of media doesn't have a verified chain of custody from a registered censor to a secure ledger, it may be dismissed as inadmissible by default. Neural evidence. If the internal monologue atrophies, courts might look toward fMRI or Neuralink data as the only objective truth. We may face a future where your private thoughts, once the ultimate sanctuary, are subpoenaed as the only remaining evidence that hasn't been filtered by an algorithm. 2. Digital minimalism, the new luxury quiet. By 2045, the ability to be invisible will be the ultimate status symbol. We are moving toward a digital class divide that flips our current understanding of connectivity on its head. Connectivity as a necessity for the poor, just as processed fast food is cheaper than organic produce today. High connectivity will be the default for the lower and middle classes. If your job is in the gig or AI-managed economy, you must stay connected, tracked, and algorithmically responsive 24/7 to survive. Disconnection as class privilege. The ultra-wealthy will pay for analog enclaves, geographic or social spaces where signal jamming is the norm and no cameras are allowed. In these circles, posting zero, having no digital footprint, will be the highest mark of power. To have a private self that is not indexed by a search engine will be the 2045 equivalent of owning a private island. The analog counterculture. We will likely see a neo-Luddite movement that isn't about destroying technology, but about epistemic sovereignty. These groups will prioritize friction, reading physical books, handwriting letters, traveling without GPS, specifically to retrain the brain's atrophied muscles of memory and focus. 3. The psychological cost, the memory market. The atrophy of the private self means our memories will no longer be ours, they will be products. Rented nostalgia. When we outsource our memories to social media platforms, we lose the editing power of our own minds. Normally, the brain forgets the mundane and highlights the meaningful to create a self. The consequence, by 2045, if a platform goes bankrupt or changes its API, you don't just lose data, you lose the ability to narrate your own life. We may see a rise in memory subscription services where people pay monthly fees just to keep access to their own childhood, reflections, and life milestones. Would you like me to explore what this means for the future of identity politics? In a world where your self can be perfectly simulated, or perhaps how the education system might change to combat this cognitive atrophy?
Yes, please, explore more.
The shift toward an externalized nervous system and the atrophy of the private self will force a radical reinvention of how we define ourselves and how we train our minds. By 2045, the consequences will move from our screens into our social fabric and our biology. 1. Identity politics, the Turing test for solidarity. Currently, identity politics is based on the lived experience of specific groups. In 20 years, the biggest challenge to social movements won't be opposition, but simulation. The rise of synthetic activism. AI can now create millions of synthetic citizens' profiles with deep backstories, unique voices, and consistent posting histories. By 2045, a grassroots movement could be 90% artificial, designed by a corporation or a state to manufacture consent. The proof of personhood divide. We will see a shift where political rights, like voting or organizing, are tied to biological verification. This creates a new social hierarchy, the verified human versus the unverified digital. The paradox of empathy. When you cannot tell if the person describing their suffering online is a human or a language model programmed to be moving, the brain's empathy response begins to shut down. We may face a compassion cold war, where people refuse to care about anything they haven't witnessed with their own physical eyes. 2. Education. From information to neurological resistance. For a century, education was about access to knowledge. In 2045, education will be about protecting the brain from the ease of knowledge. The analog year requirement. Just as some countries have mandatory military service, schools may implement a mandatory analog year. Students will be stripped of all digital tools to force the brain to re-engage in long-term potentiation, the biological process of making memories. Handwriting, physical map reading, and rote memorization, once seen as old-fashioned, will be prescribed as brain gym to prevent cognitive pruning. Friction-based learning. Educators will intentionally design difficulty into the curriculum. If an AI can write an essay in seconds, the essay becomes worthless. Instead, the final exam of 2045 might be a live Socratic defense, a 4-hour oral examination where a student must prove they can synthesize ideas in real time, without an external feed to guide their thoughts. The Cognitive Sustainability Index, CSI, schools will likely monitor a student test, CSI, a metric measuring how much of their decision-making is autonomous versus algorithmically suggested. A low CSI will be treated as a learning disability, requiring focused therapy to restore independent thought. 3. Governance. The end of public opinion. Social media was supposed to give everyone a voice. In 20 years, that voice may become so cluttered that public opinion becomes impossible to measure. The lobbying of the bots. When bots can perfectly mimic a constituent as writing style and emotional triggers, politicians will no longer be able to trust their inboxes or social feeds. A return to the physical agora. This could lead to a massive digitalization of local government. To ensure they are hearing from actual humans, city councils may move back to 19th century methods, physical town halls, paper ballots, and in-person only testimony. The global village of the internet may shatter into thousands of physical-only communes as the only way to ensure democratic integrity.